So this story was gifted to me. My husband and I, when we were first married, lived in Annapolis. We lived at the end of a dead-end street and across from an older couple named Annie and George. And they sort of adopted us as surrogate children. So there had been a big storm and a lot of tree limbs were down in my yard, and I went across the street to see if she had something that I could use to cut them up. And she welcomed me in, come on back, and her husband George was there, and I said what I wanted, and he said, Annie has an axe hung up in the basement with 4 golden nails. And she looked at him and she said, they're brass. And I said, did you do a little axe murdering in your youth? And George said, no, it wasn't us. Annie saved the whole family from being chopped up into little bitty pieces. And she said, oh, that Calvin Healy, he wouldn't have hurt those children. Wife, maybe. So, sensing there was a story coming, I took the offered iced tea and I sat down at the kitchen table, and she said, well, this was a long time ago, middle of the summer, so hot, there was no air conditioning, just an old ceiling fan. And George was at work, you know, he worked at Tillman Jewelers down in the center of the city, and my boys were somewhere. And the family that lived behind us before we put up that big fence, the oldest girl came rushing through saying, Miss Annie, Daddy's on the roof and he's got the axe. So I went rushing back with her through the azalea bushes, and sure enough, Calvin Healy was up on the roof, not of the house, but of this low shed. He was sitting up there, and he had the axe. He had the handle in one hand, and he was smacking the head of the axe up and down in the other hand. And like a fool, I said, Calvin, what are you doing up there? And he said, Miss Annie, he had this whiny little voice, they're trying to take me to the crazy house, and I'm not going to let anybody take me away. Well, I knew there had been some talk of taking him out to Crownsville, the state mental asylum, if he got up to anything else. And I said, well, Cal, that might not be so bad. Be a chance for you to get your thoughts clear. Get yourself together. I'm not letting anybody take me away. So I said, you'll be back. No. And then I said, Cal, it looks real hot up there. He was dripping with sweat. He had on one of those tan work shirts all soaked under the arms. And I said, is that tar paper starting to melt? Yes, it is, Miss Annie. And I said, you know what? I just made lemonade. Would you like a big cold glass? And he said, that'd be real nice, Miss Annie. So I went back through the bushes to my kitchen, and my eyes lit on this huge glass tankard. George had won it at the fair. And it took all my lemonade and every ice cube I had. It must have weighed 5 pounds. So I went back to their house, and he had eyes for nothing but this glass, which was now all wet on the outside. But it was so heavy, you couldn't hold it with one hand. So I held it up to him with my 2 hands and the handle towards him, and he had to get rid of the axe. So I held out my other hand for the axe. I told her she's lucky he didn't put it in her scalp. Well, maybe so, but he grabbed the handle, I took the axe, and he began to guzzle that lemonade. And while he was drinking, I looked over at the wife. She had 5 or 6 children, bump, 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 all in a row, and I nodded towards my house, and she said yes. So while he was drinking, I said, well, who wants to see the train Tommy got for his birthday? And all the children said, me. So they all followed me back to my house. And I put them in my Tommy's bedroom, and they watched that train go round and round all afternoon. And we had Kool-Aid with no ice, and I sat down with a wet cloth on my forehead. Well, round about dinner time, she came for the children. And she said the men had taken Cal away, and he had gone along peacefully enough. And I still had the axe. And I couldn't hand it back to her and said, here's the axe your husband was fixing to scalp you with. So I just kept it. And they all went home, and George came home. He said, yeah, I wanted to call the paper. I wanted to call the Evening Capital and tell them Annie had saved the whole family from being chopped up. I wanted to take that axe down to the jewelry store and dip it in bronze like we used to do baby shoes. You never told me that. I just now thought of it. He wanted to hang it on the living room wall, but we compromised on the basement. With 4 golden nails. All right, 4 golden nails. What happened to him? Well, we went to visit him out at Crownsville. You went to visit him? Well, he was a neighbor. That's what you did. Yeah, we took him a can of mixed nuts. Oh, we did not. We took him a tin can of bubble mints, like you used to take people in the hospital, those airy pink and green mints. Yeah, wasn't that a mess? Tell her. Well, in those days, the can opened with a key like a sardine can, and it peeled off a long, shiny strip. Well, Cal couldn't have cared less about the candy, but he took that strip and he stretched it out and he held it up in the sunlight in the window. He said it was his pretty thing. He was going to get a whole row of them and put them up so everybody could look at them. He was in a long ward of moaning and screaming men. And when the nurse got a look at that strip, she came down in her little white shoes and she said she's going to have to take it away because someone might cut themselves on it. He got a grip on that strip with both hands. The edges were real sharp. We left when the orderlies came, and by then blood was dripping down both of his elbows. Look at me crying over some fool who's 20 years in the grave. Anyway, let me see if I can find you a little saw. I think there's one out in the tool shed that you can use on those tree limbs. And George said, come back, you like stories? I got stories. I'll tell you about the time Dr. Weems came down to the jewelry store, and he wanted me to come with him on a house call and bring the ring cutter. You will not tell her that story. I can tell her that story. She's a big girl. And Annie was pushing me out the back door, and I said, well, why couldn't the man come into the store? Wasn't on his finger, was it? And Annie pushed me out the door. And she said, oh, that old fool, he's all wound up. And she found the perfect little saw, just as I had known she would. And I asked her, Annie, did Cal ever come back? Who, dear? Cal, did he ever come back? Oh, lots of times. That's the end. Thank you.